Good. Alright, so I am recording this, so if anybody is not in chat right now, you can watch the video, which hopefully you are doing right now, because hopefully that means the video all worked out. So what am I doing today? Today I am giving a brief lecture on essentially what it means to make video games and how we as designers make video games. I know I have a lot of friends who are game devs, so for those of you that are game dev, this is going to be a little bit remedial and it's going to go over some things that you probably already know, but I think it's important to really understand the framework of everything. Yes, you can, if you're a dev and you have different opinions or you see things that are that you disagree with, do not hesitate to say something in chat. I would love that. I would love to hear other opinions and other perspectives on things. I think that that is really, really important in this industry. So if you want to correct me on something or fact check me on something, or if I say something that's like, I think this is the most important step of dev, and you're like, actually, I think this is the most important step, I'm okay with that. That is completely awesome. I'm so down with that. So the main goal for today is to just give everyone a basic understanding of the entire start to finish dev process. So what happens when we come up with the concept of a game, how do we get to that concept, and then how do we get from that concept to launching the game and supporting the game post-launch for our players. And what is that start to finish process? That's the first step. The second step is going to be, where do we as designers fit into that? And I know that I've got some friends who are artists and also do audio and whatnot. So if you guys want to give perspectives on that, you're more than welcome to. But I'm going to be approaching this mainly from the lens of the designer rather than any of the other game dev roles. And then the third step is going to be actually taking that and applying that to the actual creation of games. With the timing of it, we'll probably just like jump into a map editor in StarCraft or Age of Empires or something like that, and work on games that are already existing in engine. But eventually I would like this to turn into something where I'm creating my own games and just streaming it as it goes on, and people can come by and watch and have fun, and it'll be a good time. So yeah, ask questions if you have them, provide perspectives if you have them. So important things to note about the game dev process is that, first and foremost, games can be canceled at any time. So just because you have a concept, just because you have actual in-dev work, or you're in alpha or you're in beta, doesn't mean your game can't get the plug pulled for whatever reason. There are some really well-known instances of games that have been almost completed and have been canceled. The most recent that I can think of is Scalebound, which was a Dragon Final Fantasy or JRPG looking Xbox exclusive that got canceled like 2 months before it shipped. And then the process is not universal, so it's relatively well followed among most devs, but every dev is going to do things differently. Every dev is going to value something differently. One dev might put a ton of emphasis into the alpha phase, whereas another dev might put more emphasis into the beta phase. Some devs concept for like 8 to 10 months, whereas other devs will concept for like 2 weeks and then pick their winner out of that 1 week. So the process is relatively universal in the sense that most teams go from concept to prototyping to dev to alpha, beta, and then to launch. But where those fall in the pipeline is a little bit different. Speaking of that pipeline, each thing that you make in your game goes through that same pipeline process. So it's not your game as a whole is made from the concept phase to the ship phase. You will do that process as a whole, but every time you put something into that game, it goes through that process again. So Skyrim is a good example. Every single dungeon that was ever made in Skyrim went through the concepting phase, the prototyping phase, the dev phase, the alpha, the beta phase, and then as those pieces are done, the pieces fall into place. It's kind of like a puzzle when you make a jigsaw puzzle, a lot of people will make the boundary, and then they'll fill in all the pieces in the middle. That's a lot of what game dev is you make the boundary of the concept of the game and what you're going to do with it, and then where it finishes, and then you fit in those pieces as you go. But again, those pieces also follow that same dev pipeline that the game as a whole does. So the game as a whole goes through that process. It's a 10-step process that's broken down into 5 phases, which obviously we'll be getting into. And like I already said, please, if you have questions, do not hesitate to post it in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on chat, so if anyone has anything they want to ask, I will take a peek every here and there, and we will get into it. So the process as a whole is concepting into researching, into Wizard of Ozing and prototyping. While Wizard of Ozing and prototyping is also going on, you're working on a beautiful corner. Once those 3 things are done, you make a vertical slice. Most games get greenlit from the vertical slice. Once the vertical slice happens, that's a good point for games to say, you know, yes, we are going to be making this. Again, games can be canceled at any time, but usually once you get through here and you're greenlit here, you're a lot safer to finish out these last phases than when you're in here. A lot of times you'll go through these phases quite a lot, go into these phases a little bit, and then once you're here, that's where most projects either live or die. But again, games can be canceled at any time, keep that in mind. So once you're done with Wizard of Ozing and prototyping, you get the vertical slice. Then you have the development, which is where you actually make the game. Just to clarify, the game has its own pieces to it, and those pieces have input. Yes, so this process as a whole is the game dev process. This is how you make a game, but then all the individual pieces of the game go through this process as well. So with Hearthstone or with Magic, I know you're a Magic player, so when you make a Magic card, the Magic card process will go through all of these steps. So that one individual card, all of this happens to it. Whereas Magic as a whole has already been made and the game has already been created. So Magic the Gathering has already gone through all of these phases, and they're in post-launch support with Magic. But when you make a new pack, when you make a new card, those cards go through all of these processes again. Hopefully that makes sense. And then after you're through your vertical slice, you have your development, which is where the game is actually being made, and all of the pieces that we just talked about are being created and putting into the game. Then you have your alpha and beta. The game is still not done when you're in alpha and beta. It's just it's in a point where you can show it to players, and then players can actually look at it and figure out whether they like it or not, whether the game will be successful or not. After your alpha beta and you get your feedback, you launch the game, and then after you launch the game, you have post-launch support. And then all of these phases have a goal, and obviously the goals are on the right side, but you're essentially looking at what you're making in the first phase, which is concept research, if it's fun and if it's good and if people want to play it in the Wizard of Ozing prototyping corner vertical slice. Development is actually making the game, putting it all together. Alpha beta is putting it in front of players, figuring out if players like it and if players want to be part of that. And then the launch phase is actually putting it out there and making your money and selling your product and having people buy and play your product. And then post-launch support is just growing your viewership, growing your team, and then, or not your team, growing your player base. And then if the game is a live game, you're continuing to add content to the live game. Live games are Hearthstone, Magic, Rocket League, League of Legends, games where you're constantly updating the game with new patches. And then there's other duties in post-launch support as well. So, the concept phase. And again, the phase 1 goal is what are we making? Concepting is taking nothing and turning it into something. And what I mean by that is when you make a game starts purely as an idea. I have an idea that we should make a game where you play in a futuristic cyberpunk society and you have to kill Cthulhu by becoming a cyborg. That's a concept for a game. So how do we take this idea and make something fun and turning it into an entire process? That's the whole goal of concepting. It's just, what is the feel of our game? What is the flow of our game? Where do we want our game to exist? What genre of game do we want it to be? It's really important in concepting to remember that there is no such thing as a bad idea, and that you don't leave any ideas unturned, an idea stone unturned. And what I mean by that is, it's really easy to hear concepts and hear ideas and think to yourself, wow, that's a really not a great idea for a game. So some good examples that I can think of is, I love Horizon Zero Dawn. It is an incredible game. It is amazing. It is easily one of my top 3 games on the PlayStation 4. But the concept for that game is really, really strange. The concept for Horizon essentially is, you play as native people, but you're also in the far future, and robots have taken over, and you're running around killing all these robots, but they're also giant robot dinosaurs. Like, that's the whole concept of the game, and that sounds very... I'll get to that one in just a minute. So that sounds like a really strange and silly and goofy concept, and there's a lot of questions there, like, why are the robots dinosaurs? Why am I native if we're in the far future? Why are we in the far future? Why did humans survive, but some of them didn't, you know? So there's just a lot of questions there, and if you hear that concept right off the bat, it might be really easy to write that off. But Horizon's an amazing game. Another good example is Halo versus StarCraft. So the pitch for Halo is, you play as a space cowboy who has to go rescue his girlfriend from parasitic infection and also a highly advanced alien race that thinks you're desecrating their religious lands. The concept for StarCraft is, you play as a space cowboy who has to go rescue his girlfriend from an alien race that thinks you're desecrating their religious land and a highly infectious parasite. Like, it's the exact same concept between Halo and StarCraft, but Halo and StarCraft are 2 completely different games outside of their genres. Obviously, StarCraft is an FPS, and Halo is StarCraft is an RTS, and Halo is an FPS. But strictly outside of the genres and just looking at story and feel and flow and gameplay, they're 2 completely different games. So don't let the fact that a high concept or a pitch sound dumb, or that it's already been done before, deter you from exploring that. So to get to Love Machine's question, live games are most esports games and competitive games then? It seems like live games that are... Yeah, so most live games are esports and competitive games. A lot of games right now are live. So like a good example is Fortnite and PUBG. Like, neither of those games really have a very strong esports or competitive scene. They do exist, but it's not as strong or fleshed out as something like Hearthstone or League or Rocket League or Dota. But those are also live games in that PUBG is constantly being updated. Fortnite is constantly being updated. There's new weapons that are being introduced. There's new skins. There's new packs. There's new this. There's new that. The other thing. Most games these days are live games. And even games that aren't live games still have a live component to them. So like Call of Duty is not a live game. You make Call of Duty, you get Call of Duty, you buy Call of Duty, you play online, you play the campaign, and then a year goes by and you buy your next Call of Duty game. So that's not live in the sense that when Activision ships Call of Duty X, they go on to Call of Duty Y. But at the same point, content still is made for Call of Duty X, mainly in map packs, and I don't know if they do weapons balances as well, to be honest with you. I imagine that they would, but that is an example of a game that is not a live game, but also has its own esports scene. Like, there is a Call of Duty esports scene. So in leaving no game dev stone unturned, one of the best ways to do that is to have what's called the yes meeting. And the yes meeting is a meeting where everyone comes together, talks about games, talks about what they want to make with games, and you are not allowed to say no. So if someone pitches something that seems weird or dumb or done before or outlandish, you can't say, no, that's a bad idea and I hate it. You have to say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's explore it more. And what that does is that forces you to look at these concepts without the lens of this is bad. It forces you to look at the concepts with the lens of this is good. Or more accurately, there could be something here. That's like one of the most important things about pitching, is understanding that there could be something here. So like Horizon is another good example. If you hear that pitch, you might think to yourself, okay, that sounds really dumb. But if you approach it with the lens of there could be something here, how do you expand on that something and make a full-fleshed, really good game? And a lot of what Horizon does that is good is through their gameplay, is through their feel, is through the culture that they created around these native tribes. The culture of the machines themselves, like the dinosaur machines, when you see them in game, are fucking cool, and like they're big and scary and terrifying, and you really feel dwarfed in comparison to them. So a lot of what sounds not great in that pitch was expanded upon and made one of the best games I've ever played. So that's why it's really important to do the yes meeting, and then you're also just pitching these ideas. So your pitch is essentially an elevator pitch. I've already gone through 2 or 3, so I won't harp on that anymore. But when you are making those pitches, you really want to emphasize what your core concept of your game is, what your game feels like, and then why your game is something that should be played. You want to avoid the whole like, oh, this is Dark Souls but X, or it's like blank but with Call of Duty elements. Your pitch should really encapsulate in 1 to 2 sentences what makes your game cool, what makes your game fun. And when you're concepting, you are not prototyping. So you're not actually building levels or creating things to show that your game is good. It is strictly on paper. This is the 2-sentence explanation of my game. Let's explore whether this is good or not. And this is where you really work on your feel, your flow, and your genre. You're not as focused on individual gameplay elements. So going back to the Halo pitch, we got the feel from Halo, we got the flow from Halo, we got the genre from Halo, but we didn't get 2 weapons and grenade types are going to be important, or oh, the Spartans have super Spartan abilities that make them awesome. So we weren't as concerned about that. We were just more concerned with what does Halo feel like. And then when you're done concepting, and kind of at the same point of concepting, you also want to do research into what you're making. So is what we're making fun? Is what we're making profitable? You have to draw inspiration from previous titles. So if you want to make an RTS, you better be playing Age of Empires and StarCraft and some of the more recent RTSs. RTSs is in a really weird spot right now. Sorry, because outside of StarCraft, there's really nothing major on the market right now that is successful and popular. So RTSs are in a weird spot, but if you're making an RTS, you should be playing StarCraft. If you're making a Dota game, you should be playing Dota and League and looking at other MOBAs. If you're making a Battle Royale, you should be playing Fortnite and PUBG and all that. And then while you're playing these games, you have to figure out what they do that works, what they do that doesn't work, why they're fun, why they're certain points they are not fun. And you're also doing a lot of business shit here. So you're figuring out if your game is marketable. You're figuring out if there's a target audience. You're figuring out what is popular in the industry and in your specific genre right now. So you research your game, you pitch your game, the pitch gets picked up, and they're like, okay, we like this pitch, we want to see more. That's a really important point to emphasize. It's not, we like this pitch, we're going to make this game. It's, we like this pitch, we want to see more. And that's where you start actually building the core fun of your game through Wizard of Ozing and prototyping. Quick note on Wizard of Ozing. I have actually never heard that term from anyone in the industry outside of Brian Schrank, who is a professor at DePaul. And he's the one that taught me, I would say, like a solid 80% of what I know about making video games. And Shrank had Wizard of Ozing coined as a term that, again, I've heard him use it. I know he's been in the industry. He's worked for a handful of devs, but I've never actually heard him I've never heard anyone else other than Shrank use the term. But what Wizard of Ozing is Wizard of Ozing is immediately testing your core mechanics of your gameplay using physical elements. So you're not in-engine, you're not building something with the tools that your team has available to you. You're using dice, you're using cards, you're using crumpled up pieces of tin foil, and you are strictly seen in the absolute fastest time you can if what you're doing is fun. If you take your entire game and strip it down into like one tiny microscopic element of gameplay, you should be able to recreate that one tiny microscopic element of gameplay through Wizard of Ozing. So an example of Wizard of Ozing for tic-tac-toe is if I roll a 6-sided die, is it fun to roll a 6-sided die until I get the number 3 times, or until I get the number 6 3 times, or until I get the number 1 3 times, or whatever it is? That is how you Wizard of Oz tic-tac-toe. Whereas prototyping is that process, but then taken a little bit more in-depth. So with prototyping, we're focusing more on that fun, and more on that fun, how it relates to our final gameplay product. So when you're prototyping tic-tac-toe again, I want to see if rolling my number 3 times is more fun than someone else rolling their number 3 times. Or can I build something in engine, and is it fun in engine? So you're not fleshing out an entire level, you're not fleshing out an entire concept. You're using rudimentary art, rudimentary gameplay elements, but you are testing to see if what you're making is fun, more in-depth than Wizard of Ozing. And it's really important when you're prototyping to fail fast and fail often. And it's really just important to do that in game dev as a whole, because there's just not enough man hours and man time to work on these games. So you have to be able to do something very, very quickly, prototype very, very quickly, and know very quickly whether it is fun or whether it is not fun. That whole process should take you very short amount of time, because you just don't have enough time to make games if you are spending too much time prototyping, or if you don't know what is or is not fun. Wizard of Ozing is like prototyping yeah. So Wizard of Ozing is basically prototyping the prototyping. Wizard of Ozing is something where you take that concept and then strip it down and make it really simple so that I can do that very quickly. So like the discovery mechanic for Hearthstone. If I want to do Wizard of Oz, the discovery mechanic in Hearthstone, I would take a deck of cards, I would shuffle that deck of cards, and then I would draw 3. And if I draw higher than a 4, then that concept is fun. If I draw lower than a 4, then that concept is not fun. That's because when you're doing discovery in Hearthstone, your main goal is you want to find something that is more valuable than what you played to discover a card in the first place. So that's how you would Wizard of Oz the discovery mechanic in Hearthstone. Whereas to prototype that, you would go into something like Game Maker, or you would actually make physical Hearthstone cards that represent your new pack, and then you would shuffle all those cards, and then you would discover 3, and then figure out if repeatedly through discovering 3 you have fun and you're excited about drawing 3 cards and picking one of them. So hopefully that makes sense. And then while the designers are doing the Wizard of Ozing and prototyping, the artists are doing the beautiful corner. The beautiful corner is a lot what it sounds like. It is a art-focused process where you take what you are working on and you put in final ship art. So you will have your character fully animated, fully fleshed out, fully dressed in their garbs or whatever, so that people get a sense of what your character looks like, and then also people get a sense of what your world looks like. So is the world pretty? Is the world not pretty? Is the world exciting? Are there rocks? Is there moss? Is there stones? Things like that. Ideally, you do want to put it into a corner so that you don't have to like deal with background animation and deeply fleshing out the background. It is essentially an art pass. You're saying this is what our game is going to look like in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, when we ship. It's pretty. Do we like it? Yes, no. And again, it's focused on art. You'll have very, very minimal interaction from anyone else. Like, you might have some engineering to make sure things function and that the camera can pan around and whatnot, or that your character can move and interact relatively well with the art. But even then, that's a little bit more vertical slicey, which I'll get right into that next. Mainly, the beautiful corner exists purely for your artists. So this is an example, going back to Horizon, this is an example of a beautiful corner. I just took a screenshot from Horizon and put it into the PowerPoint. Ideally, your beautiful corner would just be this green outline, and you wouldn't have to worry about all of this background and shit. I actually don't know if UI elements are included in a beautiful corner. If anyone that is deving right now knows the answer to that question, feel free to put it in chat. And again, this is also another not great example of a beautiful corner because it's not in a physical corner. But this is what a beautiful corner would look like. You would have really crappy, poorly rendered, poorly drawn out like elements that could represent trees. So this could represent a tree, this could represent a rock. And then you'll have final ship of what the game will actually look like. So you'll have beautiful rocks, you'll have this giant tall neck that I can see what the tall neck looks like. You'll have your actual character here. Chris in the chat said that he's never had experiences with UI in beautiful corners. So Chris, thank you for your insight. I'm sure someone out there does it somewhere. Again, this goes back to the what is important, what is not important for studios individually. But a lot of times, honestly, it's just a representation of environment and a small slice of gameplay. Never seen UI included. Yeah, for sure. Small slice of gameplay. That's actually a good transition into the vertical slice. So what the vertical slice is it's a lot like the beautiful corner, only you're actually introducing some gameplay elements into your game. So we're seeing what our character can do, what our character is capable of, how our character interacts with the environment. It demonstrates the final art, feel, flow, gameplay of the game, but it is not... It's kind of demo-y, but it's not like a demo in the sense of what you give to other people. It's more a demo in the sense of internally. Oh, and we've got Clifton joining us. Actually, Clifton, you would be a really good resource on this. UI. Does UI go into beautiful corners? Is that something you've experienced in your career, or is that something that you have not experienced in your career? For those of you who don't know, Clifton B is a UI designer in the industry, so he would certainly be a very, very good resource to know the answer to that question. But with your vertical slice, yeah, so the beautiful corner is it's basically an art pass where you show your final quality art next to like your shitty, poorly rendered Maya art. But what I don't know is I don't know if UI elements go into your beautiful corners or not. That's one thing I don't know. But back to the vertical slice, and Clifton, I'll just let you throw it in chat when you're ready. But back to the vertical slice, it's a lot like your internal demos. Sometimes vertical slices can be used for bigger companies as their like E3 demos. So if you see those, brief gameplay moments in E3 that show something that's awesome and cool, it's kind of like it's a vertical slice there. This is going to be a weird analogy, but it's actually a lot like screening for cancer. So if you potentially have cancer, what they will do is, let's say you have like cancer of the liver, rather than like taking out a giant chunk of your liver, what they will do is they will cut a very, very thin vertical slice of your liver from top to bottom, and then they will look at that entire slice of your liver to figure out if there's cancer cells in your liver. So the vertical slicing gameplay is a lot like that, where you take this giant element of your game, strip it down into this really, really very thin... Yeah, biopsy. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. But they will take the tiny little vertical slice of your gameplay, juxtaposition with your entire huge game into this very thin element, and then show that very thin element to get a feel for what your total game is going to look like. So Clifton also is saying hasn't seen examples of UI in the final ship. I don't think UI is in not final ship. I don't think UI is in Beautiful Corners. I've had multiple people say it now, so I can't think of anyone that has done it. I don't know. Riley, we looked at your game and it's cancer. Oh man, that's oof. Also, we picked up a new follower from the Other Ocean. Other Ocean, I appreciate you. Thank you much. Big thanks. So, we pitched our concept. They said they wanted to see more. So we made our vertical slice, and they're like, hey, this is cool. We like this. Let's make a game out of it. So that's usually, again, that's usually where your games get greenlit or they get killed. And if they get greenlit, then you're relatively safe. But again, keep in mind, a game can be canceled at any time. And if you're greenlit, then you go into actual development. Development is where you make all of the things. So when you make all of the things, again, keep in mind, this concept or this process repeats itself. So if I'm making a dungeon, if I'm making a card, if I'm making a new champion, I'm reconcepting, I'm repitching, I'm reprototyping, I am remaking it. That Dragon Cancer is an amazing game. Don't play that if you are in a mental state where you are about to be like just sad and depressed forever. Like, if you are going to play that game, you have to understand that you will be sad and depressed forever, and you have to be in the right mind frame to like deal with that, because that game is so fucking sad. It is just like one of the saddest experiences of ever playing video games ever. I mean, it's an amazing game, and it tackles a really, really difficult concept. It's a game that a father made about his daughter who has cancer. So it's a really important game to be made. Meet up real soon. I know I'll have a lot to say about this. Yeah, Cliffy, for sure, man. Absolutely. I mean, I'm still here in Portland, so anytime you want to meet up and we can chat about it and we can do like a group stream, I'm totally down. So absolutely let me know. We also picked up a new follower from Clifton. So Clifton, I appreciate you, man. Thanks for dropping by. We will, I'll be in chat with you. We'll figure it out. Where was I with this? So yeah, we're making everything in dev. We're putting it into master. It's important when you're making to waterfall all of your assets so that you're not stepping on people's toes and that you're not just like making shitty work that is slowing everything down. So if a designer designs level 1, that's awesome. The designer needs to then move on to level 2 while artists are putting their art into level 1. Engineers are making sure that level 1 all works together. The audio folks are making sure that level 1 sounds great. And then that process repeats itself so that you're not sitting there doing nothing, and that everyone's constantly working on the game, and that the team as... Oh, it was about son? I thought it was about daughter. I could have sworn it was about daughter. Thank you for the fact check, though. I appreciate you. We also picked up a follow from TNG Adam. TNG, thank you for the follow. Definitely appreciate having you. Hope you are learning a thing or two about making video games. So, like, back to the waterfall. If you're making a character, someone fleshes out the character, and then when that character is fleshed out, it's delivered to the rigging team to rig it up and make it actually move and make the arms function and things like that. And then, I'm only here to tell you you're wrong. I like that. I appreciate that. And then while the rigging team is making sure that the arms and body move, there's a different art team that's working on the actual like flesh and clothes of that character. And then there's a lighting team that's making sure that that character is always lit, fam. And then things like that. So that's an example using art of how we don't want to step on each other's toes. But we also want to make sure that when we are working on these games, we're always working on them. We just work on them in sequence so that assets are being delivered to each other in a way that no one's just sitting there doing nothing. But at the same point, game dev has bottlenecks. So at some point, there is a point where your big dev process goes thin, and you have to work through that thin process so that you can pop back out the bottle on the other side. So the product obviously goes through the most amount of changes in the dev phase, because that's where you're actually introducing things into the game, putting things in the game, making your content, making your dungeon crawls, your weapons, your storylines. But there's some content that is mostly hard locked. Nothing is ever really hard locked in games, because games are constantly changing products and constantly changing art forms. But like, you're going to change an NPC well before you change your main character, or you're going to change gameplay elements well before you change your core gameplay loop, or you're going to change your lighting engine before you change your genre. So there's a lot of things that can be changed, and pretty much nothing is safe, but there's a lot of finite elements that usually you don't mess around with. And then again, the process is repeating itself while we're in dev. So we're deving the game as a whole, and we're still going through that concept to vertical slice to dev to alpha beta to ship. But then in dev, that process repeats itself for all the individual elements we're making. That's the wrong window. Alpha. So once we get our game into a point where we can show it to people, we do the alpha phase and we do the beta phase. Again, it's not finished, we're not done, but it's just we are comfortable enough with our game that we can put it in front of other people, and other people can play it and tell us whether it is bad or not. Under an NDA, of course. People use the terms alpha and beta interchangeably, but they really are not interchangeable. The alpha and the beta are two different things, and you want to collect different data with them. So the alpha, you have targeted playtesters. You bring them to your studio. They play your thing in long binge stints, and then they tell you what's good or what's bad. So you want people that are highly experienced in whatever you're making. So League of Legends, I actually talked to a few Riot devs at GDC. When they do a champion rework, they will bring people in from their community that have tons and tons and tons of hours on whatever champion they're reworking. So if they rework Fiddlesticks, I'll get to that question in just a minute, Ocean. So when they rework Fiddlesticks, they will find people out there that have like 3,000, 4,000 hours played in Fiddles, and then they'll bring them to Riot, and then they'll play reworked Fiddles, and they'll be like, okay, this is what I like about Fiddles, this is what I don't like about Fiddles. Chris is right, an NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. It is essentially an agreement that you as a player, when you do an alpha or beta sign that says, I'm not going to tell anyone about this game, I'm not going to tell anyone about what happened in it, I'm not going to tell anyone about the questions that they asked me, I'm not going to take screenshots and post them online or share the gameplay on the internet. It is essentially what the devs do to protect their intellectual property. Because you have to remember, a lot of what goes on in game dev is from the marketing and business side, is keeping your things relatively secret, showing people what you want to show them when you want to show them, keeping your ideas internal so that the big surprises of your game aren't out there. So like, that's why a lot of times when someone reviews a game immediately after it comes out, they will say like, hey, we're going to review The Last of Us. This has huge spoilers in it. It's just a way for devs to protect what they're working on. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for asking. I appreciate it. So when you do an alpha, what you are looking for is, are the players having fun? Are they going through the game the way we want them to? Do they know what to do? Do they know where to go? Do they understand what weapons are powerful and what weapons aren't powerful? Things like that. And it's really important when you're going through an alpha playtest to not help your playtesters and really tell them what to do, because you want to get that feedback of if they know what to do on their own. So if we take a level, top-down level design. No, that's not what I wanted. That's dumb. All right. So I have no idea what this level is. Apparently it's from the XB1000 top-down level design on Pinterest. But if I was playtesting this level and I dumped my players right here, what I want to know is, do my players know to go to this green door and then enter this hallway and know to go through one of these 3 green doors? Or do they mess around with this blue door or this wall over here, or try to figure out a secret passage out of the hallway? So I don't want to tell them, you know, oh, you gotta go through that door, and then you're in this hallway, and then you go through there, and then there's a giant encounter here. Like, let's say a bunch of enemies run in from this, this little room here. I don't want to tell my players that, because the main goal of alpha testing is to figure out if your players naturally know to go through the level progression the way they're supposed to. Because if you don't tell them where the door is, or let's say you need to get a key to open this door and the key is hidden in a desk over here, if the player doesn't know that and the player can't figure out, this door's locked, let's find a key, then that tells you that the player's not being guided. Which is really important, because if the player's not being guided, then, and now this is going to be screwed up, yep. Because if the player is not being guided, then you know that you've failed in your level design, and you need to design your level a little bit differently. So that's why it's really important to not tell your players what to do in your alpha tests until they are 100% stuck. Like, if they are 100% stuck and they're at the point where they don't want to play the game anymore, and they're literally saying, like, I don't want to play this game anymore, here's your controller back. Like, that's the point where you would say something like, have you tried finding the key in the room? And they're like, oh, there's a key in this room. And then they go around. So that's still valuable data, because you're like, oh, okay, this player was so upset and frustrated at not being able to find the key that they didn't want to play my game anymore. So you would document that and you would record that, but you would not let that diminish and take away from the play test. This has slightly too very see how it changes direction again, like a case. Sorry for a wall of text. Yeah. But no, that's a really good point, Chris, and that's something that I didn't actually touch on here, is a lot of times you also have to have specific play test builds that are a little bit stripped down and rudimentary to definitely figure out what you need to figure out from your players. So I was in the Sea of Thieves beta, and the Sea of Thieves beta was not very populated as far as, like, what I call flavor content. So there weren't a lot of just ambient NPCs meandering around. There weren't a lot of things jumping out of the water and swimming in the ocean, stuff like that. So when you give your playtesters these games, you want to strip a lot of that filler content down and that flavor content down, so that they just have core gameplay, so that you are figuring out if they work through and understand that core gameplay. But an alpha is different from a beta. So alphas are very small targeted groups of playtesters, whereas betas are very large groups of playtesters. And the important things with betas to remember is that on alphas, you are bringing people to your place. Betas, you are sending your product to their place. So the Sea of Thieves beta that I just mentioned, Sea of Thieves was delivered to my Xbox. I turned on my Xbox one day and I had a Sea of Thieves download. You're still part of an NDA. You still can't post screenshots or stream it or things like that with your betas, but the beta is a little bit less controlled in that standpoint, as far as what you're looking for, who's playing it, and what feedback you're gathering. So the beta is not about what do these very experienced players feel about our game. It's just sort of what do the masses feel about our game. And you're looking for your feedback in different ways. So it's not targeted, this is what I like, this is what I didn't like, this is how I feel. feedback. It is, are people putting hours into the game? Are people posting on the forums? And people gather their beta feedback in different ways. Most companies will have you post on a forum, but some people will actually have you run logs on your machine, and then they have access to all of those logs and know like what's going on and what actions you took in the game and what code was executed in the game. Some people actually have you post like screenshots online to internal forums about what you noticed and what the games were. And you mostly are looking for, again, just do people like the game? Do people not like the game? You do have a little bit of bug feedback, but not to the degree that you would from an internal QA team. And I'm actually going to get into that slide next because that's a pretty contentious point in the industry right now. But your main focus with beta is just getting a lot of people to play your game, stress tests, load tests. So how many people can we have in this game at once? Can we have 10,000 people in this game? Can we have 50,000 people in this game? And then there also is a marketing component. If you put out a beta, you put out a beta so that people can play your game and they can get hyped for your game. And that's why you see a lot of betas that happen like a couple months right before release, is because you're still doing your stress and load testing and you're still looking for those last minute bugs before they get out into the wild. But you're also building up the hype for your game so that people want to play it. So, again, like I said, this is a contentious point in the industry, but alpha and beta testing and early access versus an internal QA team. Why do I need an internal QA team if I have alpha, beta, and early access? One of these things does not replace the other and vice versa. A QA team will never be able to recreate what you want from alpha, beta, and early access, and alpha, beta, and early access players will never be able to replace what you want from a QA team. So the issue that you have with QA teams that makes alpha, beta, early access players helpful is that because a QA team has been in the game from the get-go, they don't have that player lens and they don't necessarily approach the game the way that someone who would play the game would approach. It's like if you are this close to your game at all times, you can't open up and take the horse blinders off and see it from the broad perspective of what the game is and what the game is supposed to be from a gameplay standpoint. Similarly, your QA team is going to look for certain things, but they're not going to be the same things that your alpha, beta, and early access players want. And then your alpha, beta, early access players aren't going to look at things, the vast majority of them aren't going to look at things from the perspective of a QA team just because they don't have that internal knowledge. You know, most alpha, beta, early access players don't know what passing an audio asset through engine is. They don't know what a character model is from a rigging standpoint. They don't necessarily know, if you look at the Skyrim creative engine, there's a lot of pieces in the Skyrim creative engine that dictate like where an NPC can go. If an NPC can sit down at a table, if an NPC can wander out of Whiterun and just go into the forests or the pastures or whatever. A lot of players don't understand that, and a lot of players don't necessarily know the technical side of what goes into making a game, whereas your QA team does. And so that's why there's value in having a QA team. But there's also obviously value in having the alpha, beta, early access players. Playing the game and writing a bug are very, very different things. So a lot of alpha, beta, early access players will write a bug report and it'll be like, I played this game and this thing happened. And that's not what a QA team does. And I laugh because I do QA for a living right now. So a QA team, when they write down a bug report, they'll say, this is the date I found the bug, this is me, so that you can talk to me if you need to learn more about the bug. This is the build engine number that I had the bug found in. This was my testing environment, so you know I'm playing a PC with these specs and this operating system. These are the steps to reproduce this bug. So step one, and this is really like high level stuff. It's not just like, oh, I went to Whiterun and talked to this guy. It was, I loaded the game, this was my build, these were my stats, I went to Whiterun via this path, I talked to this person via this path. This is the dialogue tree that I went through. This was the quest that I was delivered, and then he spontaneously combusted and died. Obviously, that wouldn't be a bug in the wild, but that just demonstrates the high-level reporting for bug reports. Ocean, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. I'm going to keep going, obviously, but I should, hopefully, if the recording works out, I'll have all this on YouTube so it can be watchable if you want to catch the second half. Do appreciate you stopping by and for the follow. Thanks much. We'll see you next time. So playing the game and writing a bug report as a QA team versus a player are two very, very different things. And a lot of times players don't necessarily always know what they want, or they know what they want, they just don't have to articulate, or don't know how to articulate it. So if you're playing Call of Duty, or if you're playing GoldenEye 007, or any FPS really, a piece of feedback you might get from a player is there aren't enough guns. That's what the player is saying, but what the player really means is none of these guns that I have are fun to play with. You can have a game that's got 4 guns, and if all 4 of those guns are fucking awesome and just make the player feel great and make the player feel powerful and the player has an amazing, amazing time with just those 4 guns, that's enough guns. So player feedback is usually, and this is a big challenge with devs and something that a lot of them struggle with, player feedback is less about what is the player saying and more about what is the player telling me. And that's why alpha, beta, early access is really important, is to know what the players are saying, and then you as a designer can interpret what the players are telling you. So that's why it's important to do both these things, and that one does not circumvent the other. So then our next phase is launch. Make sure you have all hands on deck for servers and game-breaking bugs. So launch is cool. Like you get to actually make your thing and put it out there and give it to players, and players can play it and buy it, and you can make money from it, and people can go on Twitter and say like, oh, I did this thing and it's cool, and they can share screenshots and things like that. So launch, I included launch as a phase because obviously it's the end goal, but it's also important to recognize that when you launch, things can get buck wild very, very fast. Pokemon Go is a great example because the server load for Pokemon Go was significantly higher than Niantic ever expected. So they had to do a lot of frantic server work to make sure that people could play Pokemon Go. Sea of Thieves is the exact same way. When people got into Sea of Thieves, their servers were not ready for it. So Rare had to do a lot of server work and had to sequence people into the game. People got mad about it, so they had to have a community service response and make sure that their players understood what was going on and that they were properly responding to what was going on. Careful about the guns are bad, make them better. Players are saying we want more guns, we want more maps, we want more enemies. It might just be these fucking will give us more. Yeah, that's not to say I'm like discrediting player feedback. It's just a lot of times, like obviously player feedback is important, and when you make your games, you are making them exclusively for your players and absolutely no one else. The important thing to recognize there is that from the lens of a designer, design is a lot more about motivating people and navigating people through spaces the way you want them to, and a lot less about what the players, not necessarily what the players want to do, but just, it's kind of this like symbiosis relationship where, you know, I want the player to behave in a certain way, and players are going to do what they're going to do no matter what. And I'm actually going to get into that in a later slide. But it's important to respond to your players and make sure that you are pleasing the general masses of your players, because you can't make everyone happy. If if I put in 12 guns into my 6-gun game, the guy that likes those 6 guns is going to be like, well, this is fucking stupid, and then they'll be pissed off. But then the people that were part of, you know, hashtag Team 12 Gun, they're going to be super great. So you sort of have to make sure that you're making everyone happy. The main point I was trying to make there is just recognizing what feedback you're being given, and then how that feedback translates into dev and translates into making the things you are making. So I'm not saying like you have to discredit what your players are saying, or that what your players are telling you is garbage. It's just recognize that there's a lot of different feedback you'll be receiving, and like some of that feedback, all of that feedback is, let me qualify that, 99% of that feedback is good. 1% of that feedback is just not relevant. But then of that 99% of good feedback, a lot of that feedback is going to be not digestible in dev terms. So you kind of have to understand what people are saying versus what they want versus what they ask for. But yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. So then post-launch support. This is actually the slide I was going to get into in response to Chris's comment. So yeah, if you're working on a live game, which we've already covered, Hearthstone, Rocket League, League of Legends, things like that, then your post-launch support is continuing to create content, continuing to put the content out there, making sure that your content fits in with your already developed product. So if I'm making a Hearthstone pack and I release a Paladin card that destroys all Warlock cards, that's not going to fit into my game very well because a lot of Warlock players exist, and there's a lot of high tier Warlock decks. So that is not a good example of something that is going to fit into my current game. But if I'm working at Riot and I make League of Legends champions and I make a DPS jungler, I have to make sure I design that jungler in such a way that that jungler is individually fun to play with, but it's also fun to play on that team with that jungler. So if I'm a mid lane, top lane, or bot lane, and someone picks Agaroth, the fearless jungler, do I, as one of those non-jungler players, go like, fuck yeah, we have an Agaroth? Or do I go like, fuck no, we have an Agaroth? Likewise, do players on the other team go, oh, we have an Agaroth, or they have an Agaroth, we automatically lose, or, oh man, they have an Agaroth, I guess we just automatically win because Agaroth is terrible. So, you know, you have to make sure if you have a live game that whatever you're making still fits in with what you're currently doing. Agaroth is a good name. I'm going to write that down. Agaroth. Nice. So, Chris, like I was saying about players, game devs trying to get players to do what they want. Players are always going to break your game. It's a fact of life. They're going to break it by doing weird, goofy, buggy, glitchy things where they try to break through walls or try to get a million billion assets on the screen. But they're also going to break the game through meta and through winning and figuring out what the absolutely perfect min-max combo is for your loadout or your deck or your whatever. Or if I have this champion in League or in Dota, and I build this, and this, I do literally the most damage in the game. Like, players are always going to figure out where your game can break from either a numbers standpoint or from a tech standpoint. So part of post-launch support is always making sure you are counteracting that. So if Miss Fortune, when she has 6 Infinity Edges, does 1 billion damage, how do I nerf Infinity Edge or Misfortune to make sure that Misfortune doesn't do 1 billion damage and doesn't become a pick or ban champ? And then when I nerf Misfortune or when I nerf Infinity Edge, they're going to come back and figure out that Shen is now the most overpowered champion. Okay, how do I change around Shen to make sure that Shen's more balanced and that Shen has play at different levels? And then that process is just constantly changing. And it's important to recognize in post-launch that you have different player types, so you have to make sure that you are always pleasing all of your player types. So you'll have your collector. That's the person that wants to get 100% of all the content. They want to pick up all of the blood gems, the like 50 blood gems that you put all throughout your game that only exist to get the "you got 50 blood gems" achievement. There's going to be someone out there that wants to do that. The tryhard, there's going to be someone out there that wants to know exactly what the perfect build for the perfect character is, and that they can beat everyone else. You're going to have your explorer that's a lot more interested in just meandering around the world and doing all the side quests rather than the main quest. You're going to have your griefers and your trolls who just want to ruin the experience for other players because they draw satisfaction out of that. And then you'll have your socializers, your people that play the game and kind of have fun with it, but they're a lot more there for interacting with the NPCs and interacting with other players through chat and through socializing and things like that. And then unfortunately, another sad part about post-launch is the 21 gun salute. And what I mean by that is every here and there you have to put a game down. You have to take servers offline. You have to cease support for a game. It's no longer profitable for you to be focusing on that game that has 100 daily players or whatever it is. So that's another sad part of post-launch support, is figuring out when it's time to kill a game and when it's time to take a game offline, and how you do that and how you communicate that to your players. I've played games before that have gotten the 21 gun salute, and I've played games before that have just one day content stop being created for them, and the Twitter account didn't exist anymore, and the website didn't exist anymore, and like the servers were still live, but they were just kind of like live and bumming around and doing nothing. And it's like, okay, what's going on? Why is this game not being supported anymore? Like, what does that mean for me as a player? I put money into this game. What happened to my in-game content? Is that gone? Is there any option? Is there any like legacy content that's going to be put into another game? Is this studio still exist anymore? So you gotta, even if your game is dead and is not living anymore, you still have to support your players in the sense of at least communicating what happened. And then again, this is it all in one nice little fancy image. This was the same image we saw at the beginning of the slideshow. So this helps us revisualize everything in one top to bottom, start to finish process. So that's great and all, but what is a designer? So there are multiple types of designers, which is why I have this, which is a fancy schmancy, can I zoom in? Sweet, I can. Fancy schmancy image of breaking down the various types of designers. So as designers, and this is where we're going to start getting into the high meta of designing. I'm going to slide my face cam over a little bit. High meta of designing and what we do as individual game designers. Designers create fun. That is your whole goal when you make a video game as a designer, is you want to make the experience fun for your players and make sure that whatever you are doing and whatever you are putting into your game, it has a purpose of creating fun. Now, there's two types of fun, and it's important to understand the relationship between those two types of fun. There is fun, and then there's anti-fun. So fun and anti-fun is, and this mainly exists in PvP games rather than PvE games, but there is a PvE component. You can't make a machine sad. Like, no matter what you do to a machine, it will not be sad. So Dynasty Warriors is a good example. So in Dynasty Warriors, you play as one character versus hordes upon hordes upon hordes upon hordes of enemies. Like, you'll kill 10,000, 20,000 enemies in one run of Dynasty Warriors. I can kill 100,000 enemies, and I will never ever make the computer sad, because the computer can't be like, aw, all of my guys died. It's a computer. It will just constantly spit out more enemies. But if I'm playing a game of League, if I'm playing a game of Hearthstone, if I'm playing a game of Call of Duty online, if I'm playing Halo. If I'm playing something where I am facing another human being and one of us will win and one of us will lose, there is an element of fun that is being created and there is an element of anti-fun that is being created. So it might be fun to kill someone in Halo, but it's also not fun to die in Halo. So you have to figure out that relationship of, can player A who wins this engagement have fun, while player B who loses this engagement also has fun? Which essentially boils down to, can player B counterplay what player A is doing? Can player A counterplay what player B is doing? And can it come down to whichever player is better wins? So a good example of fun is when you're playing a game of League of Legends and you're in bot lane and it's Misfortune and Alistar versus Jinx and Thresh. So the plays, Misfortune and Alistar can outplay Jinx and Thresh, but Jinx and Thresh can outplay Misfortune and Alistar, and it really comes down to the who can last hit well, who can get their gold, who can get their items, who can play better. And even though there's certain things that Misfortune and Alistar can do that Thresh and Jinx cannot do, and vice versa, there's a balanced element of fun there, and it's fun for both players to play those champions and to try and outplay the other player and still win. Whereas an example of anti-fun is going back to that Hearthstone example I used a little bit earlier. If you put in a Paladin card that's just like, hey, destroy all Warlock cards in your opponent's deck, like, that's not fun for the Warlock player, because there's really nothing the Warlock player can do. And then if you introduce that card into Hearthstone, literally everyone would run Paladin, and no one would run Warrior. There would be absolutely zero purpose to playing Warlock anymore, excuse me. And within design, there's really no such thing as a game designer, and I'm actually going to counter that point a little bit later down the image. But there are different types of designers, and different types of designers want to do different things. And when you are one of these different types of designers, you are creating different kinds of fun. So the most, I think, well-recognizable designers are level designers, and level designers create the environments that our players interact with, and they create the space that our players interact with, and are responsible for the flow, the encounters, and the rewards. So if I make a Skyrim dungeon, and I'm a level designer on a Skyrim dungeon, I am creating the physical space of that Skyrim dungeon. I am placing the enemies in the Skyrim dungeons so that I know, okay, if I come around this corner and I fight 4 kobolds, I know that I, as a designer, put those 4 kobolds there. I put that corner there because I want the player to come around the corner, see 4 kobolds, and be like, oh shit, 4 kobolds, and pull out their weapons. And then when they kill those 4 kobolds, and they clear that dungeon after killing those 4 kobolds, they get the Sword of Kobold Killer that has +4 damage to kobolds. Like, those are all my responsibilities as a level designer, is creating that feel, creating that encounter, and creating that reward. The content and narrative designers is another type of designer where you are the one that is actually like creating the story elements of the game, and you're responsible for all of the content that is going into that game. So you're the one that designs the NPCs, designs the various items that you can pick up. So that Sword of +4 Kobold Killer, going back to the level designer example, that is something that your content and narrative designers come up with. So that is something that they're the ones that came up with the concept of that sword and what that sword does. And then they're also the ones that will design that NPC, the NPC that gives you that quest line. Now I put writers immediately below them as like their own separate little thing, because some studios will have their writers be separate from their content narrative designers, and some studios will not. So some studios, your content narrative designers are responsible for fleshing out everything and writing everything in depth, whereas other studios will have your concept and narrative designers do 10-second or like 1-line, 2-line gives for their weapons, their pitch, their quest lines, their NPCs, whatever, and then a writer will actually go in and flesh out that dialogue, or flesh out that lore description of that weapon. Or going back to Skyrim, you might have a writer that actually physically writes out all of those books that you can pick up in Skyrim. So they're very similar roles, but some companies have them handle them just a tad bit differently. And then after that, you have your systems designers. And your systems designers are responsible for one complete element inside your game. So there might be a system designer exclusively dedicated to combat, or exclusively dedicated to magic, going back to the Skyrim example, or exclusively committed to Riften. There might be a system designer that is purely working on systems in Riften. They're also responsible for balance a lot of times. So systems designers are usually the ones that sit there and deal with the crunchy numbers and figure out if the glass axe does 12 damage per swing, is that more or less balanced than the ebony axe that does 14 damage per swing, but is harder to handle, and you need a higher level to use that ebony axe. So that's mainly what system designers are focused on. And after the hard cutoff, I would say, soft cutoff, for what a game designer is kind of comes right here. All these other roles that I listed are sort of more like hybrid roles. So your tech designers, I put a bunch of question marks there because if you ask 12 different studios what a tech designer is, you're going to get 12 different answers. But the most simplest way to describe a tech designer is a hybrid between your engineering roles and your design roles. So a tech designer might be focused on putting something in engine, or implementing the tech side of design while still also fleshing out design as a whole. Again, it's a weird role that a lot of studios view something different with their tech designers versus, god damn it, this fucking chair. With the tech designers doing different things for different studios. I can't speak too much intelligently for tech designers, just because none of the studios that I've worked with have had tech designers in the past, and it's also a position that I myself have never held, obviously. So, but it is a design role, and it's something that fits into design. Similarly, the UI UX designers, so those are people that are focused on interaction in your game and how the users focus on the game, and also how the users navigate and move through the game from a menu standpoint. So obviously navigating through Riften is, can I walk through Riften? Is Riften designed in such a way that I understand where to go and I understand where my quest gives are? But opening a shop and talking to a shopkeeper and buying a sword while you're in Riften, that's going to be a UI UX designer's job because that's a menu. So it doesn't really fit into design in the sense of what we were talking about as far as how to interact from gameplay elements, but they do have a very strong relationship with your designers and your players. Your UI UX designers are almost always exclusively responsible for your user feedback out of alpha, beta, and playtesting, because that's what the user UX stands for, is user experience. UI is user interaction. So it's another one of those hybrid roles that is a little bit more on the tech side, and if you talked to a systems designer or a content designer or a narrative designer, they would never ever tell you that a UI or a UX designer is what they do and vice versa, but it definitely fits into the design pipeline. And then like I said, I was going to contradict myself. And I will contradict myself by saying that the last role is just the game designer role, which really the only studios that have a true and true game designer roles are your Naughty Dogs, your Blizzards, your Riot, but your studios that have just insane numbers of people working on multiple games all at once. And the game designers do kind of all of these things all at once. And they also exist as I don't like this term, but this is a term that you earn once you earn this role, as the quote idea guy. And what I mean by that is they're the ones that are looking at current games and gameplay and looking at fun and how to create fun and how to play with fun and create like spaces of play in new and interesting ways. So the game designer is a lot more of a role that you get later on in your career when you've become very, very not content. What's the word I'm looking for? Competent. When you become very, very competent at all of these different roles above and have demonstrated that, that's when you can become more of just a less defined game designer role, where you kind of just have your hands in the game in many different ways. And you're also working on new things and doing like research and development-esque types of things as a game designer. And again, this is one of those roles that like a lot of people, it's kind of like the tech designer role where a lot of different people define it in a lot of different ways. And then after that, there's senior level of any of these things. You can become a senior systems designer, you can become a lead systems designer, and then after 10 years and multiple ship titles, your top run right here is the creative director or design director, which is where you're doing everything all at once, and you are, depending on the dev, working on multiple projects. So an individual game will have a creative director. So going back to Horizon, which is made by Guerrilla Games, Horizon has an individual creative director, but Guerrilla might also have a design director that's overseeing Horizon, Red Faction, and then another unannounced project. So you can potentially be doing all of these things for all of these different games, and you're essentially responsible for the game's vision. So you're the one that decides what your game is going to be like and what it is going to be when it ships and how it will feel and how it will play and how many hours you're going to go into it and all these various decisions that make a game fun and make a game a game. You are the one who is responsible for all of that content. And then these are all the things that designers are not, and things that they are not concerned about. And I hate to use like not your job, because like part of being game dev is being a good team player and working on games as a whole. And like if you see a problem, being like, oh hey, this is a problem, let's look at some solutions. But at the same point, I really want to emphasize, and this is more for the people that are not designers and have not had industry experience, what we are not concerned about as game devs. So as game devs, we are not concerned about if we're bringing in good people and if our people are being paid well. That's recruiting and HR's worry. We're not concerned about whether things look good or not. That's our artist's job. We're not concerned about if they function technically and if they can be put into the engine without the engine exploding. That's the engineer's job. We're not worried about if we're going to get sued. So if we make a Call of Duty game and we have a gun in our game and, you know, it's a revolver and it looks like a Smith & Wesson revolver, and then Smith & Wesson is like, you can't put our revolver in your game. Like, we don't care about that. That's our lawyer's job to worry about. Or if when you're making a Spider-Man game and Spider-Man has like a different shade of red and Marvel gets mad at us because it's the wrong shade of red, like we don't give a shit. We let our lawyers deal with that. If we put something into a game and it is broken, we're sort of worried about that. That's mainly QA's job to figure out if it's broken and then to tell us that things are broken. But you don't want to make stuff that's deliberately and intentionally broken, obviously, but like, we're all humans. All of us as humans make mistakes, and so part of being human is fucking up, for lack of a better term. And like when we fuck up, QA's job is to point that out and be like, here's where things are bad and here's the mistakes you made. So obviously we don't want to make mistakes, but it's going to happen. And when it does happen, it's not our job to find those mistakes and worry about those mistakes. It's just our job to fix it once QA points it out to us. We don't care if things sound good. If things sound like good or not good, that is not our problem. So that is audio's job. We don't even like implement our own audio. Like when we design a level, that level will be completely 100% silent, and then it is up to the audio designers to make that level not silent and make that audio engaging. Similarly, when we make a level, we're not concerned about whether or not it's lighted well. Like we'll put some basic lights in to be like, here's where I want one light, here's where I want another light, here's where I want a candle light. But as far as making that light actually look good and realistic, there will be an entire lighting artist who does exclusively that. I know a lighting artist on Twitter. He's actually one of my absolute favorite Twitter follows in the world. But like that's his job, you know? His job is to take shitty looking designer light and make it look fucking awesome. And it's great that we have people like that we can do that. So, but that also kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning, where like we're pseudo concerned about these things, but not in depth of that to that level. Like if I give someone a level that has no lights in it whatsoever, and I'm just like, here, light this, they're gonna look at me and be like, well, what do you mean? Where do I want the lights? Where do I want the player to go? Because a lot of what you do in player direction and in guiding your player is done through lighting. So a good example is if I want my player to go through a certain doorway because there is either the next part of the level there or a really powerful pickup that I want them to have so that they can kill the big bad boss at the end of the level, I might light that door a little bit differently, or I might have like a flickering light on the other end of that door that shines through the window. So it's important to know where lighting is going to be, but we're not exclusively focused on making the lighting look awesome. We're not worried about whether our game will sell or not. Again, it's got to be a well-designed game, and we're responsible for that component of it. But as far as like if the game can sell on TV spots, or if the game can have a booth at E3 or GDC or whatever, we don't care about that. That's marketing's job. We will put the game in front of marketers, or marketing will put the game in front of people so that marketing can make our game be sellable. We're not worried about if our game's going to be ready by launch. That doesn't mean that we're not like sitting around and like twiddling our thumbs and just like farting at our desk repeatedly, but following a schedule and hitting our deadlines, it is the producer's job to make sure that we are in a position to hit those deadlines, that we are waterfalling our assets properly so that we're not stepping on each other's toes. And then if Sony or Microsoft or Nintendo are going to reject your product, that's not our job to worry about either. It is exclusively Sony, Nintendo, or Microsoft's duty to look at it and be like, oh, okay, you pass because of these compliances, or you fail because of these appliances. Rewatch the video though, peace. All right, cool. All right, Love Machine, thank you for stopping by. I appreciate it. I hope you did learn something, that there was some tiny thing of value here. Appreciate having you, man. But depending on the size of the studio, either your producer is the one that deals with that, or you will have someone who's actually a dedicated compliance member, or a compliance. Sometimes they're called compliance testers. But if the studio is big enough, you'll have somebody whose exclusive job is to make sure you are in compliance. So those are all the things we are not concerned about as devs. There's a handful of things that we are concerned about as devs. So that is the end of what I have prepped as far as like slides and PowerPoints go, and images. So I hope you guys gained something of value there. I'm going to take like a 5-minute break just to top off my water and also like rest my voice for a little bit. And then we can actually get in and make some games, which will be pretty awesome.